We'll remain at the question of the industrial development of northern Sweden. Our next speaker is a professor of economic history at the University of Uppsala. Her present research addresses the drivers, obstacles, and preconditions for economic and social transformation here in the northern Sweden, both past and present. Please welcome Ann-Kristin Bergquist.
Whoops. So, also very nice to be here. I actually grew up in Luleå, so it's really nice to be back. And like Sverker, I'm going to give some historical perspectives on the ongoing transformation in northern Sweden. And I am an economic historian, and I know by training how difficult it is to predict the future dynamics of economic development, and that one must be very careful about prophecies, as also Sverker showed in his presentation. But what historians can do is to look at trends and patterns, and causes and effects behind economic transformation and compare. So what we can do now is actually to look at the drivers behind the ongoing industrialization and compare them with the past industrial processes that has taken place. And I assume that this audience is fully aware of the investment projects, at least the size, that are now happening in this region at the moment. And I think we can just repeat it very briefly. Expected investment mounting to 20%, actually mounting to 20% of the Swedish GDP in 2021. 20% population growth in this region. And this will also, of course, put an extreme demand shock on labor, pressure on already existing firms in this region, the public sector for education, healthcare, etc. And also different numbers around about the future demand for electricity, but it's going to be huge. And the very size of these investments has already given rise to really big historical questions. Are we witnessing indeed a new industrial revolution where this region is actually a scene where it all has begun? Is Norrland at the moment the scene of being transformed into a global leader in addressing in the response to climate change? And here is just the three big investments at the moment: Northvolt in Skellefteå, H2 Green Steel in Boden, and Hybrid in Gällivare. And these societies or local communities, especially H2 Green Steel, has not been built yet. So the jury is still out there if this will happen. And I think we are in a moment when there is still time to think more deeply about how to get it right. The question of how to get it right is, of course, a complex one. And one thing we can do is to explore the challenges and opportunities and look at the drivers behind these investments. So I'm involved in a larger research program that looks at the drivers, challenges, and opportunities related to this ongoing industrialization. And the program is led by an economic geographer, Rickard Eriksson, and has just started and will run for 7 years and has an interdisciplinary approach. Interdisciplinary approach. We are included also political scientists, architects, etc. And I'm leading a work package of historians. And since the research program has just started, I cannot tell you about the results yet, but I will still moving on to these discussions about drivers and compare them with the past industrial revolution that has happened here. So we all are aware, of course, about the role of climate policy. We have the Paris Agreement, the expected rise on carbon at the EU ETS system, EU Green Deal, and of course also Swedish national climate policies. But equally important, if you also look globally, is the global competition around investments and be a technological leader, for instance, among battery production. So there is this competition between China, EU, and the United States. But I will, in the remaining of this presentation, talk about drivers from a perhaps different angle and talk about values. What are the driving purposes behind the investments? For whom is the development taking place? And there is a new book just out by the Harvard professor in business history, Jeffrey Jones, titled Deeply Responsible Business, A Global History of Values-Driven Leadership. And it proves, based on a number of historical cases, the importance of business leaders' values and purpose when it comes to the impact of investments. So I think we should really talk more about this values-driven leadership. So how can we look at the values that drives the investments today? I have only one example here, so excuse me if there are representatives for HT Green Steel or Hybrid. And this is the founder of Northvolt and CEO Peter Carlsson, and he has stated this in different wording. The reason why we started the company is we're really trying to solve a big problem, and that is the global problem of global warming and the increasing amount of carbons in the atmosphere. So this purpose is like really great. But what is the focus? Where is the focus on the local development? So we can put what is going on now in a broader context. And this is not the first time, as Sverker demonstrated, that Norrland has pioneered industrial transformation. And during the second industrial revolution, from the late 1980s, there were big high-tech investments also around electrification and mining that was carried out in the region. Huge efforts was also made, actually, to attract workers from the south to the northern Sweden. And I'm just going to talk about one example here, and that is an industrial development that is in the Västerbotten region, and the Boliden company, today a global mining company and Swedish, Europe's larger recycling plant for electronic scrap. So the company today is about to celebrate 100 years next year, and it started as a gold and mining company and built its own smelter in the 1920s. And those who follow the Swedish media at the moment, they can see that something happened at this smelter. Yesterday, it's actually caught fire, and I didn't know that when I made this presentation. So let's hope for the best in terms of environmental impacts. But if we look at the drivers back then behind these investments, it was actually the second industrial revolution going on. And it was a huge demand for copper, related also to, again, electrification, just as it is today. We had the telegraph, internal combustion engine, electricity generation, batteries, etc. And this created a global demand for copper, big time. So these economic drivers, examples of them are quite the same as there are today. So why am I going to show a picture of this man, Oskar Falkman, the founder of the Boliden company? It's because he had actually some interesting value-driven leadership thoughts of that. He was an engineer, graduated from the Royal Institute of Technology in Stockholm. And after graduation, he went to the United States and worked for Carnegie Steel and got terrified of the working conditions. And he later became an advocate for 18 hours working day as a business leader. But what he was very concerned about was the speed of the industrial development. Like now, the region got internationally known for this gold mine that he discovered and developed and tried to block or calm down global investors. He feared an over-exploitation for short-term financial gains. And the picture shows him and the global financier Ivar Kruger, but also the Guggenheim's brothers were interested in this company. So what he states in the end is that I, Falkman, managed to resist these interests, and Boliden can today, in 1941, serve as a springboard for further exploitation work as well as creating the conditions for further industrial development in the region. So what values did he have? And this is like what he wrote at the time. Good relations with the local community is a prerequisite for building a successful and sustainable industry. But also good relation with other businesses, like the forest industry, who was already existing there, agricultural land, peasants, etc. But he also had a lot of thoughts of how to create well-being. Trivsel in Swedish, it's a bit hard to translate. Of the employee was a key. Also to attract good labor to this industrial project. But also how to build a model society, create housing and good conditions for people to move there. And he also stated that an industry must give something back to the society in which it operates. And that corporate profits is not an end in itself. Profits, according to his value, is only a means for creating something. And there was also a big concern about what will happen to a local community when the mine is finally depleted. And I'm soon done. I just want also to mention this is on his view what large industrial project could bring to the local community. Not the global, but the local. Of course, the same arguments as today, creation of new jobs and new communities, increased tax revenues, but also improved infrastructure that stimulates entrepreneurial natives. It was the 1940s, he wrote this, to start trucking businesses, companies, etc. But also, and when you look at the board minutes from this time, there were a lot of discussions in the board meetings of how to build schools, shops, Salvation Army premises, cinemas, and people's houses, business leaders discussing how this should be done, and also investing in it. And according to him, then all this will pave the way for implanting other entrepreneurship. And in the end, and this is the north then, isolation and boredom will be broken. This is a nicer house from Boliden, the company town Boliden, how he imagined also as the workers should live with gardens and good health conditions. So what about now? Are there Falkmans around to say, wait a minute, how are we as entrepreneurs in this region going to create local well-being and give something back to the region in which we operate? Remember what he said, it was not only about the companies that providing working opportunities and tax revenues. Today, of course, climate change urges rapid energy transition, and global business actors and investors are responding to these by mega investments. But the values-driven leadership aims for more a global mission, and much of the responsibility for the local community that business took, in some cases, not everywhere, is now down in the knees of the municipalities. I'm not saying that Falkman all he did was correct, but it's rather about his focus, the focus on the local community and imagining how it could look like. and investing in a community that would attract a workforce. So I think municipalities stands quite or too alone to handle these investments that has a global mission. And I have not even had time to talk about the role of the state. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ann-Kristin.